To everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. We have Bill Sargent back on the program. If you are listening to us for the first time, please like, subscribe, and share this interview. Bill Sargent back on the program. We were talking about horseshoe crabs. Now we are on to the lab leak now, and we're going to be talking about that. Hopefully we don't make too many people upset, Bill, today. But first of all, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate your time again.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so quickly, before we get into the lab leak, just in case people did not hear our last interview, can you just tease the book one more time before we get into this?
The book that just came out was called Crab Wars, A Tale of Ecology. The original title was A Tale of Horseshoe Crabs, Bioterrorism and Human Health. Right. And I wrote that right after 9/11. And it was kind of related to the other book that I did, which is called Terror by Error. And I looked at the lab leak hypothesis. And it was related because when I was looking at the horseshoe crab industry, I saw that people, that there were accidents. If you talk to any scientist, having an over a beer conversation, and you ask them if they've ever had any accidents in their lab, they'll laugh. They'll say, of course we have. When you're doing cutting edge research, all kinds of things are going to go wrong. We have Murphy's law that says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And that's particularly true when you're doing cutting edge research. So what they were doing in China is what's called gain of function research. And that's where you take a virus like COVID-19 and you put it into a ferret. And a ferret is a little weasel-like animal. And you put it into the ferret and it mutates just the way it's mutating in humans now. We are now the ferrets, but it mutates. You take it out of that ferret and you put it into another ferret and it mutates some more. And after you do that to so many ferrets, the virus can jump from ferret to ferret, which means that it can jump from human to human. So it's gained the function of transmissibility. In other words, it's contagious. And so we used to do that kind of research in this country, and we banned it because we felt it was too risky. But what we did do is we continued to fund it in China. So I think that's what was happening. The people were successfully doing this research, and then the ferret sneezed or it wiggled and the guy jammed himself in the finger, or something happened. He got blood or ferret feces on his hands, and he picked up what we now call COVID-19. And he would have been what they call patient number 0, who was the first patient to come down with COVID. And then he would have been transferred to the Union Hospital, which is right beside the Wuhan lab. And would have infected the first 44 patients that came down with COVID-19.
Now, I know your credentials, but can you just tell the people, because some people may listen to this and say, well, this is just some guy on the internet just throwing a lot of BS around. Can you just tell the people that are listening that you do have credentials for this?
Yeah. I've actually written about 27 books on science and the environment. I won the Boston Globe's Winship Award for best book by a New England author. And I've also been a consultant for the NOVA Science program on PBS.
So, Bill, I want to talk about this because my question is, when we are hearing this on the news about gain of function research, I know the Obama administration actually defunded that. And then Dr. Fauci came back and said that he wanted that funding back, and the Trump administration gave that funding. Can you talk about, and you did describe gain of function, but can you talk about why the media, why the government, why Dr. Fauci in general has been saying, oh, that's not the case, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I should even say, but now we're seeing Joe Biden come out and say that he wants an investigation on this. Now, Dr. Fauci says, well, it could have happened in a lab leak. We don't really know. So they're really changing their tune from the way they were talking at the beginning of the pandemic to now. Why was it so hidden at the beginning of the pandemic about this gain of function research and how it really could have led to an escape compared to now it could have happened? So it's like they're slowly moving into that direction where I think you believe, and I do also, that it was that gain of function research and it did leak through the lab.
Yeah. Well, I was living this because actually my book was the first book that came out that talked about the lab leak hypothesis. And of course, when it came out, nobody paid any attention to it. No one wanted to talk about it, partially because Trump was still in office, and everybody thought that it was a conspiracy theory. I actually think it's exact opposite of a conspiracy theory, because a conspiracy theory, you have to have, some all-knowing evil person who is pulling off this conspiracy. I think it was a simple accident. I think they were doing the kind of research that they were supposed to be doing, and somebody made a simple mistake. I make simple mistakes several times a day. Mine don't have as big consequences, granted, but I think we're all human, and we all make mistakes.
So do you think of, take your pick, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton was president at this time and not Donald Trump, then it would have been a whole different story. I am a progressive person, but my thing was with the media, they were so fixated, and they still are, on Donald Trump and trying to make him look bad, that they, said, oh, that anybody was talking about this lab leak, like you said, was a conspiracy theorist. So do you see that? Like if take your pick of this, all the presidents that we had in the past was president instead of Trump, that it would have been a whole different ball game for the start of this pandemic, as far as, saying that it's a conspiracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think if anybody else was president, the media would have been all over it right from the beginning. And I think the media really blew it, because nobody was paying any attention to it. No one would even look at it. No one would even come out and investigate it and say, well, it's wrong. I think if they started investigating, and what they're doing now is they're beginning to realize that this is probably the most likely scenario. It's come down, to two theories. One, that the virus has come from nature, and it's come from, that there's a reservoir. It's bats that have the disease, and then you have to have what's called an amplifier organism. So it would go from the bats to something like a chicken or a pig, and so you have avian flus and swine flus, and they're named after that amplifying organism. We haven't been able to find an amplifying organism for COVID-19, so I think that's that's pretty big evidence that that's probably not the route that it took, and I think there's very substantial circumstantial as evidence that it came from the laboratory. I think the main thing is that where the bats are about 1,000 miles away, where you have the bats that have the COVID virus. So it would be a little bit as if you had a lab in Boston that was studying these viruses. And all of a sudden, some of the lab workers started getting sick, but the disease itself was 1,000 miles away in southern Florida, you'd be fairly suspicious. How did it get? Maybe it was a snowbird going back north. But if people are doing this kind of, and and in fact, we have laboratories, we have what are called level 4 biocontainment facilities right in Boston, where they're doing this kind of research. People aren't very aware of that. I think they were. It's a little bit like, living next door to a nuclear power plant. And the consequences could be even more severe, as we've seen that happened in Wuhan.
I want to talk about this again. Bill Sargent, Crab was, definitely check out the book. Bill, as we keep going into this conversation, my thing is, are you worried about another pandemic happening again?
I think we're actually doing more gain of function research than we were before the pandemic started. And there are no guidelines. It hasn't been banned. So I actually think we should be reacting as if both possibilities could have happened. In other words, both that it was a lab accident and that it came from nature. So if it came from a lab accident, you don't want to be doing this gain of function research, or you want to be doing it, you want to have very strict guidelines for how you do it to make sure that you can do it as safely as possible. If it came from nature, then we don't want to be encroaching on nature the way that we have been. So we don't want to be getting close to where you have these reservoirs. There are about 87 what are called zoonotic diseases, and these are diseases that start in the wild among something like bats or monkeys or whatever, and then they can jump to humans. So we don't want to, you don't want to be eating bushmeat. You don't want to be eating, things like monkeys, and you don't want to be around the bats. 6 of the original people who came down with a pneumonia-like disease were actually shoveling the guano out of one of the caves where all the bats were. And they all came down with a novel, what they call the novel form of pneumonia at the time. It's pretty likely that was COVID-19.
So why are they still giving more money to, and obviously you're not the the person that's divvying out the money to these organizations, the NIH and Dr. Fauci and stuff. So why are they still giving more money to gain of function research?
Well, it's the way we have been preparing. What you have to do is you have to figure out a year ahead what the signature of the next flu is going to be, so that you can develop a vaccine. And the way they have traditionally done this is with this gain of function research. There are alternatives to that, and I think that's what we should be pursuing. I'm sure the practitioners would say, well, the gain of function is the most efficient way to get to it. But I think there are these alternatives that may not be quite as efficient, but they're safer. And some of them can be, pretty close to full, completely safe. Because they're not dealing with a live animal. They might be just dealing with cells.
As far as the COVID vaccine goes, do you believe in the vaccine? Because Dr. Fauci cannot answer this as far as to, people that have gotten COVID, that they have that full immunity. And it's possibly, and this has been studied in medical journals, that it's possibly even as far as better than having the vaccine than if you had COVID, that if you had COVID, you're better with the vaccine. I'm going to shut up because I'm getting too damn tongue-tied on this, but I'm going to let you explain it.
You're doing just fine. and you're right. You're right. If you did have COVID, you have gained immunity, and actually probably better immunity. Your antibodies are going to be more fired up from actually having the disease than having the vaccine.
Bill, why won't they say that on TV? Why won't a person like Dr. Fauci, who is the medical man of the United States, worked in the NIH, he's supposed to be going on TV as a trusted individual. He won't say that. And this is why people don't believe in these things, because they want to keep pumping you with it. And then, they're trying to bring out these booster shots, and the NIH and the CDC say we don't need that, or it's only 65 and older, and not, for people that are under 65. And then you have Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson saying, well, we just want to get these approved. So it seems like there's a lot of money behind this. And that's why I think one version of why people don't trust the vaccines is because there's not clarity from the news media. There's not clarity from the medical officials. And then you hear these pharmaceutical companies that are pretty much just trying to pump people with vaccines, regardless if they might have a side effect or not.
Well, I think the effects of not having a vaccine are going to be much greater than the side effects of having a vaccine, because you could get COVID and die.
Right.
And, that's fairly likely, as a matter of fact, with the Delta variants around, that if you don't get vaccinated, it's very likely you're gonna pick up the Delta variant and end up being hospitalized and possibly dying. So I think it is, very important that people get vaccinated. I think there's a little bit of politics going on. They don't want to say things that may convince people not to take the vaccines. I think they feel that the vaccines are our first line of defense. And I think that's true. I think, both that and then mask wearing. Mask wearing is very simple. It's been around for centuries, but we've seen that it works. So
Bill,
I still wear a mask.
I still wear a mask also, and I did get the vaccine. I'm not trying to play that up, but I want to talk about that side that the other side has, where people, even with the masks, they said at the beginning of the pandemic, Dr. Fauci and many other medical people were coming on saying we don't have to wear a mask. And then people were dropping dead left and right. So, and then they say, oh, well, we said that because medical people didn't have enough masks. Well, whose fault is that? That's the government's fault. And then you have people that are supposed to be medical professionals coming out saying, do not wear a mask. And people are dying left and right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, it's a very complicated situation, and we haven't really dealt with anything like this since the Spanish flu in 1918. So I think it took everybody by surprise, really. And I think it was incredible how quickly, the virus has mutated and spread around the world. So I think a lot of people were just, caught flat-footed, and they were trying to come up, with the best advice that they could at the time. And frankly, they had limited knowledge. So, some of those messages have changed. And you're right. I mean, there were certainly mistakes. We could have been much better prepared. There were mistakes that were made, but I think a lot of it goes to just how, insidious this virus is. It has, I often call it a viral intelligence. It is mutating so much faster than we are able to develop vaccines and do all these things. It's really caught all of us flat-footed. And what we've lost probably close to 10 million people worldwide. And I think, in this country, we're up to 700,000.
Well, my thing is first of all, Trump definitely deserves a lot of blame. And I 100% believe that. He downplayed the virus. He downplayed the mask wearing. But I got to give the other half of the blame to Dr. Fauci, because he came out and also like Donald Trump, and this guy is supposed to be a medical doctor, worked under many presidential administrations, and coming out and saying that we don't have to wear a mask. If there's no mask, I understand it. I'm not a President George W. Bush fan, but After 9/11, he came out in New York and said, we're going to beat the terrorists. We're going to come together and be united. That was what Trump should have been doing. But that's also what Dr. Fauci should have did. He should have said, we don't have enough masks. Please don't buy all the masks off the shelves. Make masks, even if they're not as protective as the regular mask. And we found that out throughout the pandemic. But at least people would be wearing something. Now you have people using that excuse that's saying Dr. Fauci came out at the beginning of the pandemic and said, you do not have to wear a mask. This does not transmit through droplets, which was a total lie. He should have known that. I'm not trying to ask you to defend Dr. Fauci, but
No,
as a medical doctor, what's real is real. Go ahead.
I think what's interesting is that when it originally came out, they thought that the disease was transmitted by droplets. And the difference between a droplet is that, if we're 6 feet away, the droplet can get 6 feet away, but after that, it's going to drop down on the floor.
Right.
But what they found, they went back through the literature and found that this 6 foot thing was based on research that had been done, I believe, on tuberculosis. And they actually found that with tuberculosis, it's not spread by droplets, but it's aerosolized. Mm-hmm. So you have a tiny little mist, and these can get across a room. It can get 30 feet, 60 feet across a room. Actually, some of the original research when they were doing it, they were working with viruses in a laboratory, and the window was open. And all of a sudden they found, a week later, people in a laboratory 3 stories up were getting sick from this virus. And what had happened is that the aerosolized virus had gone out the window and then floated up and then gone into the 3rd floor window and infected these people. So we simply had the wrong information. And people had to dig back into the literature to find out this difference between droplets and aerosolized viruses. I'm actually not sure that anybody needs to take the fall. I mean, I think people were trying to do the best they could. I mean, after all, we wanted definitive information. Because nobody knew what they should be doing. And so I think a lot of people probably should have been much more careful, and much more humble. I guess I don't think Fauci is a humble guy.
Do you think it's the Chinese fault though, Bill? The Chinese were hiding a lot of information.
Actually, I think we were outsourcing. We were essentially outsourcing this gain of function research because we felt it was too dangerous to do in this country. So they were kind of doing our bidding. And if you'll remember in the beginning, a lot of the Chinese scientists were very forthcoming, and they were trying to warn us that, this horrible disease is going to be coming at us. I remember there was a wonderful Chinese researcher, and he said that whatever you should do is you should drink a lot of hot tea because it will kill the viruses when they're still in your throat before they get down in your lungs. So I my lips are still burning because I was drinking so much hot tea. But I think people were trying to spread the word, and I think what you can blame is the Chinese government, because I think they came down hard on the scientists who were trying to be responsible, and then it got political. And I think the same is true in this country. I think the medical people were trying to give the best information that they could with their, as it turns out, limited knowledge. And it was the government that was sort of screwing up the message.
Last 2 questions, Bill. How do you feel like we're prepared as far as a country and even the world? So I guess it's 2 questions in one for the next pandemic, even though we're not done with this one yet?
I don't think we're prepared at all.
Yeah.
You know, we we certainly don't have any preventative methods. So essentially, it's kind of interesting that no pandemic has ever been stopped by a vaccine. It's all come about through nature. In other words, it spreads so quickly and to so many people that it runs out of hosts. So the viruses can keep us out of the hospital and keep us alive, but they're not really going to stop they're not stopping the pandemic. The pandemic has to run its course. You just have to let nature run its course. And I think that's beginning to happen. You're seeing the numbers are coming down throughout this country, and certainly in a lot of states, fairly dramatically now. But we don't know. I should be I should be careful and not say anything definitively, as I'm blaming other people for doing that. We don't really know what's going to happen this winter. When it gets colder and people move inside and kids are going to school and everything like that, we could have a spike. And I think we probably will have a bit of a spike. We're having right now what I called a delayed wedding spike because all those weddings that people weren't able to have in the last couple of years are being held now. And you have, a whole lot of people dancing and singing and having a lot of fun. And I know of one wedding where, 23 people came down with COVID afterwards. And so I think, everybody wants to get back to doing, these wonderful things that we haven't been able to do for a couple of years. Things like going to the Patriots game and, seeing Tom Brady.
Right.
But we have to be careful because we don't really know what's ahead of us.
I've heard a lot of people on the internet, New York Times writers saying that they think that by 2022 this should be over. I know that's like kind of trying to win the lottery as far as a guess. But
yeah.
What do you think? Like you said, there's probably about 50 to 70% of the country has either had coronavirus, has passed away with coronavirus, or has a vaccine. I think it's 77% at least have one shot, according to government data. Whether that's true or not, that's par for the course. But but anyways, with all this happening, what is your estimate as far as 2022? I know it's a tough answer.
Well, I've got my call into Jimmy the Greek. And and I think he probably is going to be as accurate as anybody else right now. I know the World Health Organization is talking about March of 2022, and other people think that if we get through this winter, then things will start getting better next spring and next summer. I'd like to think that's true. I wouldn't give it 100%. I wouldn't put $100 down on it. I might put a quarter on it. How about that? I don't know what the odds are there, but
again, Bill Sargent, first of all, thanks for coming on. Definitely, if you're listening to this, please subscribe, like, and share this interview, and also check out Bill's book again, Crab Wars. Go ahead, Bill.
I will also mention that my book, Terror by Error, is available. It's called Terror by Error, the COVID Chronicles. And as I mentioned, it was the first book that came out about the lab leak hypothesis. And that's available through Amazon and through your local bookstore and through my website, which is williamsargent.net.
All right, williamsargent.net. Again, Terror by Era, also Crab Wars, whatever you want, pick it up. Bill, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Let's continue to do this down the road because you are a wealth of information. I appreciate always having you on, and thanks so much.
Thank you, and you ask wonderful questions.